Hi, Bradley Beaulieu. Thank you for being here.
Bonjour et merci. Bonjour à mes lectures françaises et merci pour euh, parler en anglais pour l'interview. Mon français est trop pauvre. So English will be better, I think. So
Oh,
thank you for having me.
your French is great. Don't worry. You speak already a better French than I'm speaking Swedish for now because I'm learning, but that's really
Yeah.
hard.
Well, it's nice to be in the place where you're learning the
Yeah,
language.
it helps.
Yeah.
It helps. So you're the author of the series The Song of the Shattered Sands. You're also known for other series such as the Lays of Anushkaya, and you have also written a few novellas and co-written other books. Here today we are in your presence to celebrate somehow the sixth and final book of the Song of the Shattered Sands, and I haven't read it yet, but soon I hope. I am currently reading the the
Yeah.
fourth one. I
Yeah.
am nearly at the end. I'm fearing the worst because I have some friends that have already read it and they were devastated. So we'll
Sorry, not
see.
sorry.
Yeah. We'll talk about a few things tonight. We will first get to know you a bit better. I'll have a few
Mhm.
questions about yourself and also your other passions. Then we'll continue with your writing process. I have a few questions for that as well. And
Okay.
we'll conclude with questions about the Song of the Shattered Sands. So we'll start with a fun question because I am kind of known on the French booktube for this, or Bookstagram. I am kind of considered as a heretic for that, but no problem. My question to you is, do you crack the spine of your books while reading
Mm.
it, or do you dog ear the pages, or do you do anything like uh, to your books that would consider be like a kind of offense? Sometimes people say, how dare you break the spine, or how dare you annotate? Because I also annotate my books. I write down my thoughts, and I sometimes even highlight the sentences, so people are very shocked sometimes.
Yeah, I remember I think it was grade school maybe that the teacher showed us a hardcover book. It was like a brand new hardcover book, and um, I know you were probably referring to soft covers, but she showed us how to properly um, break in a book, a hardcover book, and so she like opened it and sort of ran her hand down the center, the trough of the pages, and did that, again, sort of in the middle, and sort of broke in the binding that way. So I do that, but for like soft covers, I'm very careful with those. I used to read comics as well, and so like I hated it when other people like would borrow my comics and they would like break the binding because it would create like creases in the along the edge of it,
Yeah.
and with softcover books, mass market paperback books, I was just very careful not to open it too wide so it didn't, break the binding and stuff or crack the binding on the edge. But I did start to dog ear pages, as time has gone on. I've become a bit more free with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I, even in textbooks in college and such, I rarely wrote in the margins. I just felt like I was sort of despoiling, the book. But a few times I have, as I was learning how to write, I took a couple of books and I grabbed different markers, highlighters, and I highlighted the pages for different things. So like things that were description was one color, things that were narrative summary was another color, things that were dialogue or action were yet another. And then sometimes like internal monologue, like the character thinking about things, before they do something about, what they're reacting to. maybe a fourth color. So once I was done, I could go back and kind of just get a sense for how an author approached writing, because I hadn't internalized all of that stuff yet. I didn't know how, like, what was the right way to approach writing. And of course, not, now I know it's different for every writer. It's different for every project. Every project has its own demands. But it was illuminating to do that, to try to understand the components, the componentry of a story, and see how that, how they tackled it, and try to learn from it.
Okay, yeah, I understand. I usually annotate because I find like either good descriptions or intense moments or a
Mm.
character development that I would like to keep in mind, or sometimes it's just like good prose. So yeah, I really tend to annotate, highlight, just to keep all. It kind of makes me or help me absorb the story better.
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
appreciate it more in different ways.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I also, as you can see, mismatch my book
Oh yeah.
collection. I
Yeah,
always
yeah.
bought what I have on my hand
Available.
because, yeah, because I cannot wait. Just I'm known for this on the French booktube and Bookstagram.
Yeah.
Um, so I have another question for you, and this one is a question from one of my follower, and it's since you have an Instagram page and you usually post pictures of food or or baking that you make. The question is, what's your favorite meal? Just to
Oh gosh. Um, I might give a couple of answers
yeah.
and cheat a bit. So I like cooking a lot. And I often say my favorite meal to cook is one I haven't tried before, because tried cooking before, because it it tells me about technique. It opens me up to new flavor combinations. But it also, for me, it sort of touches on culture and history. And I think a lot about like where this food came from, who made this recipe, and what was it born of.
Oh.
Like French peasant meals, were created because they didn't have, and peasant meals everywhere were created because they didn't have certain ingredients. They were poor, and so they had to make do. And so they made them as good and as tasty as they could, and so there's a certain ingenuity to different types of recipes that use, maybe simpler ingredients, but they're just great to eat. And so I just love thinking about that. And I love this notion of creating something myself that was created very similarly 100 years ago, or 500 years ago, or more, 1,000+ years ago. I love bread baking as well. And the idea that bread has been around for thousands of years at this point, leavened or unleavened, and it's just neat for me. So that's one answer. And then I also love pizza.
Oh.
I love all kinds of pizza. But if I had to have like kind of a rich meal, that would be my favorite. I might say like boeuf bourguignon.
Oh.
I love that, the like the texture, the velvety feel, like that the wine gives the beef and the vegetables and such. That's just, yeah, I really love that. Particular.
Have you ever tried the fondue, which is from Switzerland? Do you know what it is?
I've had, so several years back I was in Brittany, and I went to a fondue place, and I think they had sort of the Swiss style fondue.
Okay.
And I'm gonna forget I think it was a Gruyere type cheese, and so we had vegetables and bread, and we dip.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
is that?
That's it. Yeah, it's usually it's two type of cheese. There's the oh my god, I don't even remember. Shame on me. I think
Uh,
it's a Vacherin and Gruyere. It's usually
yeah,
a mix of both, and you can have it with bread or potatoes as well. Yeah. So It's
Yeah,
it's
yeah, we had bread and potatoes,
yeah,
and
it's just melted cheese, nothing
yeah,
very
it was
special.
good. I think the one I had might have had some white wine in it as well.
Yeah. Of course, there's
Yeah.
wine and garlic and a
Oh
bit of
yeah.
cornstarch,
Oh sure, yeah,
maizena.
just
Yeah,
right to keep it from separating.
exactly. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
My mouth is literally watering right now, thinking of like that meal and other stuff.
I'm sorry.
No, no, it's good. I'll just have a bit of water.
Yeah,
So.
great. Um, Next question. Okay, so the two questions that two following questions that I have are from a tag that there's on BookTube.
Okay.
It's an English one, I think. But anyway, so it's called the Get to Know the Fantasy Reader, and there's a few questions that are quite interesting, and I wanted to ask them to you. And the first one is, what is your fantasy origin story? So how you came to read a fantasy?
So I still remember in third grade, I was at a school not far from where I live now called Berryville.
Okay.
And it was like in the US, there's lots of like little out of city schoolhouses. You might have heard the term like Schoolhouse Rock,
Yeah.
which was in the US. So small school for a small community kind of thing. And they had a little library, and one of my friends had read The Hobbit.
Okay.
And he recommended it to me. And I completely fell in love with that book, Tolkien, that world, and fantasy in general. Ever since then, I went on to read the Lord of the Rings. Following that, so that was my gateway into fantasy in general. And I like science fiction quite a bit. I don't like horror so much, but I do like dark fantasy.
Okay.
Horror just goes too much into, for me, like sort of loss of control for the characters, and I want the characters to have some sense of control, but I do like the dark aspects. And so that, I always come back to that type of story for like my comfort reading. Not just Tolkien, but stories like those where it's an older age, a simpler time, that kind of thing. I do love forests, and that's another reason I gravitated to the Hobbit, especially, and going through Mirkwood and seeing all the spiders and going on those adventures and stuff. So it was, that was great fun. It also, like, right around that same time, a few years later, but as I was kind of rereading them, I started getting into Dungeons and Dragons, and that sort of recreated that feel for me, like being able to adventure on my own into that kind of world and stuff. And
Yeah.
so it was The Hobbit and eventually Lord of the Rings.
Okay, I've seen a few of your interviews before preparing mine, and in them you mentioned the Cold Fire trilogy, I think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a book that I really want to read. It's in my TBR pile, and every time you were talking about this one, I was like, oh, I need to read it. So I don't know if you are a big fan. Is it one of your favorite book, or is it just
Yeah, it's a trilogy by Celia Friedman, C.S. Friedman, and it's So I mentioned dark fantasy, and that fits the bill precisely. It's a story in which it has science fictional underpinnings, but it is very fantasy forward in the beginning, and so this a generation ship is going to some far-flung planet, and they're forced to divert after some emergency to another planet that they can actually reach. And that planet has like a Gaia effect, meaning that the world is kind of in balance. The world is sort of aware. There's kind of this magical nature about it. And the arrival of humans throws everything out of whack. And the planet itself starts feeding sort of on humanity's fears, and so they have nightmares of vampires or werewolves or this type of thing, and they are made into being from their like imagination and their fears, and
Okay.
it's slowly starting to sort of eat them away, eat this group of people that are on this planet, and their population is shrinking to the point that they're in danger of not surviving. And so there's a grand sacrifice that's made, and I won't take it further than that to avoid spoilers. That sort of changes everything and turns it into, instead of a science fictional thing, like a fantasy-esque world. They lose the technology that they once had, and so we pick up many years later, and things look like a medieval society, and there is the sort of this magical aspect going on, and so that's what you see first, and so this revelation that comes later was just great, and it's Celia has like similar to mine. She has kind of a pretty serious dark tone, you know, throughout, and there's just this constant pressure with this, you know, this world that's bearing down on the characters and stuff. Yeah, it's one of my top, you know, handful of
Okay.
stories.
Now I really want to read it even more.
Yeah, it's great.
So next question, I love this one. It might be a bit difficult for you to answer because it takes a bit of thinking, but if you could be the hero in a fantasy novel, first, who would be the author? And you can say yourself if you want. And what's one trope that you would insist be in the story?
So if I could be any hero
Yeah,
in
if
any
you
novel,
in any novel or like one that you could invent, like who would be the author and what would be the trope if you were to be the hero? Who
oh
would
gosh. Well, so I mean, the easy answer might be Tolkien, but I've already used that, so I'm going to avoid it at this point. Um, I hmm. I've been watching a lot of like superhero type stories lately, um, and so I'll go with like a reimagined sort of comic book thing. And I used to run like villains and vigilantes and champions, which are both superhero role playing games.
Okay.
Um, you know, so maybe something set like in the Marvel universe, some kind of cool story where I become, you know, some sort of superhero that's you know pulled into the Marvel universe and stuff. Um, oh gosh, as for who would write it, um, I'm just gonna go with Chuck Wendig,
Okay.
um, because he's I really like his people talk about voice a lot, and you know people having distinctive voices, and he certainly does, and it's just like really fast and witty, sharp, snarky, you know, and I think that'd be kind of a cool combo to see what Chuck could do like with a superhero type story.
Okay. Okay, that's a great answer. Yeah, I haven't read anything from him yet, but yeah, I know the author.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so next question. What is one misconception about fantasy you would like to lay to rest? Because we always have discussion on this channel because I do live stream and we always end debating on how the fantasy genre, at least in the French community, deserves more credits that it actually currently have because in France or in Switzerland or any French speaking country, they tend to kind of like fantasy is a lesser genre. I don't know if it's the same
Yeah.
in the US, but I guess not because it's a bigger culture, I guess. So I don't know if there's one misconception or one cliche that you would like to address.
Well, you know, I think that's still true to a degree here. Maybe less so. I'm not really sure. You know, but I think the perception is that that fantasy is lighter often,
Mm-hmm.
and especially and my answer will be that it can't tackle modern issues.
Yeah.
Um, and I think more and more that's proving to, well, it has always been false. I think, you know, I think when people think of fantasy, they do go to things like Tolkien and the many different writers and stories that he inspired. Um, but there are so many stories that have come out and are continuing to come out that take modern issues and couch them in sort of a, maybe a very old medieval-esque type setting, but still address, our problems of today. Someone that jumps to mind, and he's not, I wouldn't call him avant-garde at this point, but Guy Gavriel Kay. He wrote a number of books that are set in a Earth-like world. He admits that he draws on a lot of our historical cultures and the flare points between them that have caused, strife because of racial differences, cultural differences, religious differences. And he says he likes to write in this secondary world because it allows him to not just address those issues, but also have readers accept them more, because they can kind of give up their preconceptions, or they don't have to deal with sort of how things are in our world. You know what I mean? They're removed from those, so they can maybe see the issues and accept the story and the things that it's trying to say without getting caught up in, what we're dealing with in our world. And so that has always struck me, and so I like that. I personally try to do some of that, and I know other people hit it head on. They tackle issues directly, either fantasy set in our world directly, or in very clear parallels, as to what's going on, and that's fine too. So that would be the big preconception, I would say, that fantasy is too light and it can't really talk about our modern world.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I really like, I can see it in your book and books as well, but I really like the aspect of taking a few steps back in order to better address maybe some issues. And I love it when I can sometimes pinpoint some kind of, sometimes with my boyfriend, who also reads fantasy, we like to start with a small thing that happens in a fantasy book, and then we start debating about how it can apply to our modern world, and that's so interesting. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, I haven't talked about this much, but since we're on the subject, I know that, and it wasn't a direct parallel, but I know that the story was influenced to a degree by Arab Spring, that happened quite a few years ago at this point, and this notion about people being oppressed and having this old guard, semi-archaic type system that oppresses people because that's how it's been forever, type of thing. And so, like, just people coming together and speaking up, and speaking up for their own rights, for the rights of their fellow people and children, generations yet to be born, that kind of thing. Had some influence on Cheda and her story, and the Asirim and the 13th tribe, who are lost essentially in the beginning of the story and are found as the books move along. I really wanted to explore this notion of people being suppressed and even forgotten, and purposely so, and what that would mean to them and to others who effectively lost that. And how they could get it back. What could they do to sort of revive that, that culture and history.
Well, since you're on the subject, I will ask you a question that are more focused on the series, and the first one, it was kind of the most asked one on my poll on Instagram, and it was so what inspired you to create the Great Shangazi and its diverse kingdoms and cultures and traditions? So how do you get the inspiration? What was your inspiration? Maybe your travels? I don't know if you had the chance to go in those kind of desertic areas, or maybe history, as you said.
Yeah. So early on, when I first started writing I wrote some very derivative novels that never were published. They were very Tolkien-esque. They were very Western European centric. And as time went on, I have a natural urge to, just for my own sake, to find things that haven't been so well traveled. To find an area that I can explore, that will give me interest and give me juice to write about the story. And so the Lays of Anaskaya, my first trilogy, was set in like a Muscovite Russia universe with a world that had disparate islands that were very cold and inhospitable, and they traveled via wind ships. And so you can start to see my love for like the age of sail and tall ships, coming into play. And as that story moved along, I kind of explored Ottoman Empire, ancient Persia, to a degree, kind of influenced some of the cultures. And more, as that series moved along, I got an itch to start exploring like an Arabian Nights style story. And I ended up doing some of that in the third book in that series. The characters went to a desert, and I really enjoyed it. So I wrote a short story, a novella called The Spices of Sanandira, which was the precursor essentially to the Sharakai world. It's not in Sharakai universe. It is its own thing. I kind of reimagined Sanandira as Sharakai eventually. So that fueled my desire to just an interest to do something at least I haven't done before, and hopefully other people's, haven't read that type of story before. And then the other thing, I often, when I talk about writing technique, I teach writing, and I really like this notion of like two ideas coming together and like sort of spinning off one another. And so the other idea I had initially was to write a story. The Lays of Anaskaya had a male lead, a prince of Kalikovo, and he was the primary character. There were two other female characters that played large roles, and I had multi-POVs. But I really wanted a female main character. And so I started the story, the Shattered Sands universe, with the notion of writing an epic fantasy from a single POV. And so my first draft was all Cheda. I told no other point of views at all. And I found it to be really limiting. I was starting to go through a lot of like gyrations, literary gymnastics to get information out to the reader. And it's a large story, and it just became too hard. So I added more POVs, but Cheda was absolutely my main focus, initially. And so as she started to develop, and her mother's history, and then the tribe that I mentioned a little bit ago, being lost, and I wondered how Cheda would find that tribe and what she would do when she learned it existed, that sort of thing. That sort of played off of the whole desert atmosphere and this Persian Bedouin wanderer tribe type culture and play, and they, and then things spun off from there. But that was kind of the earliest, glimmers of the story.
Yeah. So I was going to, I had a plan, but my plan is already going everywhere. So I'm just picking a few questions depending on how the conversation flows.
The plan never survives contact with the enemy, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So I was wondering how you find the inspiration to get. How can I say that? How do you find these new ideas and these innovative ideas? Because if I were to write a book tomorrow, my main concern would be, why do I write about, especially in fantasy, there's like so many tropes, and I feel like everything has been done before. So how can you, do you free yourself from these kind of established rules or tropes or cliches sometimes?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, everyone says, and I agree, and I tell my students when I teach, you have to read widely. You know, to be a writer, you must read, and part of that is to get a sense of how to write, but it's also to get a sense of what's out there. You know, what are the tropes? What have editors and readers in the end seen already? And so, how can you stand apart? And so, I often say when you're writing a query letter, you have a hook, and that hook is like your one line. And in that hook, you want to do two things. You want to tell the editor or agent what this is like and how it's different. You know, so if you can encapsulate those two things, and that's what they all want. They want to know what the market is, and that's what this is like tells them. But they want it to stand apart so that it'll be different and catch people's attention. And that's the how is it different part. And so how to do that from day to day is tough. It's a constant challenge for me and for many writers, I think, because you do want to have both this sense of like familiarity, but newness at the same time. And so my biggest trick, well, two tricks. So one is I plan stories years in advance of writing them. I'm writing other things as I'm doing this, but in the meantime, I have some rough idea for a story that I want to write, and so I use Scrivener. So I create a Scrivener doc, and I start jotting down notes about characters, world, magic system, the history of that place, general plot. Very very high level in the early going. And then I also create a Pinterest board so that I can start. Pictures really help me to generate ideas and to not just generate ideas, but to get a feel for the story, to get a feel for the tone and the type of characters that I'll have, and what they're like. And so over time, I'll keep expanding on those things, both the Pinterest board and my Scrivener document. And then so that will help create sort of this baseline, this bedrock on which I'm going to base the story. And then another big trick is to not be satisfied as I'm coming up with ideas. And so in the beginning, I mean, the reason that I wrote trunk novels is because, well, A, I wasn't a good writer at the time, but B, the ideas that I had were cliche. I took what I thought was original, but I didn't push very hard. I didn't push the boundaries of what could be done, And so as you're thinking of like a character idea, a plot idea, a world idea, the first few things that come to mind will naturally be cliche. They will be the things that you've been influenced by, that you've read, that you've seen in movies or what have you. And so keep pushing. And there's this innate thing that happens to all of us when we come across something new that gives us like this thrill, like, oh wow, that is really cool, and you almost get a shiver. Sometimes I do get shivers from other ideas, from my own ideas, and so I keep pushing until that happens. And when that happens, if I'm excited about it, that will help me write it. And I don't know that readers will be excited about it, but I hope they will, and that's the best I can do. The best I can do is to try to come up with something I'm excited by and hope that other people are excited by it too.
Yeah, I totally get it. Sometimes, well, I tried writing something like every reader, but I
Sure.
always stop at the point of I had the idea, I'm thrilled, I have the shivers, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But
Yeah.
the thing is that I never actually get to the writing parts. But
Yeah.
I get it. So maybe since I'm going to study, as I told you earlier, the narrative writing in video games, maybe that will help me get through it. We'll see, but at
Yeah.
least I will be brainstorming for ideas and maybe try to go further and yeah, as you said, push further and try to expand on this idea and maybe
Yeah.
get to something new and innovative. But yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a simple but very useful technique. It's essentially you learning to trust your own instincts,
Mm.
and and also not being content, not settling for
Yeah.
the easy idea. And partly it's sometimes being honest with yourself, on whether or not this really is a good idea. And so there's nothing wrong with like pushing harder. Like if you feel like, oh, this is an okay idea, well, keep going, complicate it. Another very useful technique for me is I talk in writing about connective tissue, which is the notion that story elements are connected to other story elements. So if I have a random character, someone that Cheta is meeting in the city of Sharakai, an example of this is Masid, who is her uncle. We find out later, but I didn't know that in the beginning. I just thought he was like some leader of a group that was trying to bring the kings down and such. And so if you can create a connection from one character to another, or one to a momentous event, in the past, or someone who's trying to do something, but we don't know it yet, those are examples. And so sometimes what I'll find is I have a bunch of ideas that are unconnected, and if I can just think of ways that they might be connected, sometimes it just snaps like, oh, that is awesome. I love this idea that this guy is her uncle. She doesn't know it yet. She will find out, and it will complicate her thoughts about him and her decisions about what to do about him, and the threat that he represents, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So and that it's not just characters, it's also like magic systems. Maybe if you're stuck, or science fictional elements, maybe you need to think about like ways to connect that to places. Maybe it's only works in certain areas or at certain times of the day, or or what have you. So the idea here is just that you try to think of ways to take ideas that you think are cool, and connect them to other elements, and a lot of times that'll just brighten them in your mind and make them more interesting to you and hopefully the reader.
Well, that's inspiring. Thank you so much for
No,
all
you're
these
welcome.
advices. As I said, I watched a few of your interviews, and you mentioned that you kind of plan your books, but not a lot. You plan like 6 or 8 chapters ahead, if I understood correctly. But my question is, did you know the ending of the series Sharakai, or was it, as you said, just connection that you made at the time?
Yeah, early on when I first started writing, I would start and just forge ahead, and I would maybe not even have a good idea of the ending. I would try to pants the story, to create it along the way, sort of build the bridge, plan the bridge as I'm building it, kind of thing. And it just didn't work for me. I couldn't continue to do that. I ended up having to plan a bit more. I got a little bit lucky in Sharakai in that I knew the ending right from the start. I based on what I knew about Cheta and the kings and the Asurim, the lost tribe and the lost people, I kind of knew what was going to happen with them. That doesn't always happen with every story, but in this particular case, I knew exactly where things were going to end up. Not how they got there, and not the exact incarnation of that final meeting, let's call it, that closes the series. But it was a stake in the ground in the far distance. And so it was, and I do that with every book now. I cannot start a book unless I know, where I'm headed. And so people talk about a useful technique in writing is to plot backwards. And so you know where you're headed. And so if you know where they're going to be, you know where they have to be just before that, and then just before that, and just before that. Now, it doesn't make it easy for me, and things are still cloudy because I haven't gotten there yet. But it does help, and so I actually do a combination of plotting forward and plotting backwards. And often, if I'm stuck on one or the other, I'll switch. In my head, the easiest, because it's the most natural to us, is plotting forward. You know where the characters are now, but plotting backwards is super useful too, because it creates like a draw, like a vacuum, for the story to pull the characters forward a bit. And hopefully you're not going towards that place. You don't want to go towards that place directly. You want to head to it obliquely, so that the story remains interesting, and you still have plot twists and unforeseen circumstances that happen to the characters. But it's essential for me at this point. I cannot write a story unless I know where things are going.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I can understand. I have a question on your writing process. So, do you have a kind of writing routine? Do you have a specific, sorry, amount of word, pages, hours, or do you have maybe a favorite place where you write, or favorite drink, maybe?
Yeah, I write full time at this point, and so my typical routine is to write here at the house. I have an office dedicated to it, and I usually try to get 2 sessions per day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. Each session is usually a couple of hours, 2 to 3 hours, and the breaks help me. I find I once I get past like the 3 hour mark, my mind is starting to wander and get tired. And so, I mean, that's usually like lunchtime anyway, but often I'll just do other things in that time. But I do like variety as well. I do get I feel cooped up if I stay here for too long. And so there's a place in Kenosha, which is a county just south of where I live along Lake Michigan, and where I was born actually and grew up. There's a small cafe there, and they have different teas and coffees and stuff. And it's just a nice place. It's a bit loud sometimes, which is why I don't do it too often, but maybe once a week or every other week. It's been different during the pandemic, but I do like being out, and just being in the world a little bit. I feel like just too alone if I stay here for too long. And they have a vanilla bean black tea, which is my favorite drink from there. It's just I don't put sugar in my drinks, but the vanilla flavor along with the black tea it's just a really nice. It's not quite sweet, but it's kind of like that. You know what I mean? Like there's almost a sweet, sweet flavor to it. It's nice.
Yeah. And do you listen to music while writing, or?
I go back and forth. I do have a playlist for. Actually, I create a playlist for every project. So I have one for the entire Sharakai series. I've used the exact same playlist for 6 years at this point. I haven't really added much new lately because it's long. I have several hours, and it's enough to take me through one session.
Okay.
And it's useful because it transports me mentally back to that place that I have been in so many times before as I'm listening to it. And so I have another one, several other projects, but I have another book coming out in December that's a deco punk. So it's a 1920s, roaring 20s reimagined Chicago. And so I used for that one like hip hop, like lo-fi hip hop jazz. And so it's got this like kind of modern feel to it, but it also an old-timey feel to it. And I like that mixture. And then I have a new one that I'm trying to get sold, a short novel project that's near future science fiction. And so I have a deep house, it's called deep house progressive mix of music from YouTube. And the common thread through all of these is that I cannot have lyrics. In music. It throws me out of my mental space instantly if I have it. There's just some rare occasions where I can listen to something that I've heard many, many times before and write to that. But for the most part, I just don't bother with lyrics. I'm just looking for the mood, really, and sort of this technique of getting back to that mental space, again. And if I'm in a coffee house, an excuse to not listen to everything around me, you know what I mean? It's an insulator too.
Yeah. Well, at least for For the Sharakai series, I have a playlist and I always listen as well while I'm reading. It's kind of a, Oriental Arab music, and I'm like
Yeah.
reading and at the same time dancing. Because yeah, it's just like a mood, as you said, and yeah, it just transport me better
Yeah.
to this kind of settings, and yeah, that's really
Yeah.
great.
No, that's cool.
Next question. Oh yeah, that's I think an interesting one, because I'm a kind of perfectionist, I would say. So I'm always never satisfied of what I'm
Yeah.
doing. So I was wondering, when do you know that your draft or your final manuscript is ready? What are your criteria to be like, okay, I know this time I won't touch anything more, except the I guess the how to say it in English, but like the editorial work that you have to do after, once you have to.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah, editing.
yeah, editing. Yeah, that's it. So how do
Subsequent
you know?
drafts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to liken my process to painting a wall. And so you do a brush stroke and it's not quite complete. And so you do it again, and then you do it again, you do it again, and then finally the wall is actually covered and it looks good, and sometimes you'll brush lightly to smooth things out, and that sort of thing. My greatest fear, because I had some novels that didn't work and became trunk novels, I'm deathly afraid of writing a book and getting to the end and realizing this whole thing sucks. This won't sell. I don't like the story, or it's just okay, and it's just not going to do well. So I push hard on. That's why I plan several years in advance. That's why I try to push hard in terms of like making sure it's interesting to me, so that it will be interesting to others. But then as I'm like drafting, I will very often do like, especially for a new project, not so much Sharakai, because it was established and I have a good sense of what the story is and whether or not it's working. But for anything new, including Sharakai, the first book, I'll write 3 chapters, 4 chapters, 6 chapters, something like this. Just something to get to a reasonable breakpoint in the story, so that it feels like something has happened. And then I'll send that to my agent often, because he's going to be selling it, and get his feedback. I'll send it to some trusted readers, maybe depending on whether or not it's sold, to my editors, and get their feedback and just make adjustments from there. I'm far enough along that usually that they're not going to be finding that the story is completely broken. But sometimes they do find some pretty serious issues with it, and I have to replan. I have to take a step back, and sort of replot in my path, to the end and that sort of thing, or even where I'm beginning. Sometimes that needs to change, and so then I'll make adjustments to that early portion, and then kind of keep going. And so I inchworm my way through the plot. I plot, I write, I plot, I write, I plot, I write till I get to the end, and then I just go over it a number of times. And so, I'm in a situation often where I don't need it to be perfect before I send it to, say, an editor. For new projects, yes, I want it to be, very good. But because I'm already published and I have, a track record, I often don't have to write the whole book to sell it. I can write a partial, and see where it goes. So that's another purpose for that early piece of the book. After my agent gets it, we'll workshop it a little bit. I'll rewrite it, and then we'll get a synopsis and a sort of a query letter type thing that he will use to take it to people to sell. So it's hard to answer exactly, because there's so many different situations that I'm in with different projects, and depending on where they are in the series. But I do try to take sort of this stepwise approach. Get it to a certain point, send it out, get some feedback, finish a draft, do a couple more edits, get some more feedback, get it to a near final stage, get more feedback, finally send it to my editor, change it again. So I go through some authors are worse than me, but I usually do about 8 to 10 drafts minimum for a project to be before it's actually done, you know, and
Okay.
out in the world. You know, those first couple just kind of formatively, and you know, and then there's time with my editor and beta readers, and then final stages of editing and stuff. So it's many passes before I feel like it's, you know, it's really done. But I do let it out of the house, so to speak, out of the coop, for people to look at, so I can get a gauge of whether or not it's working.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the feedback is important. I,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. Yeah. Um, Speaking of your writing process, I'll now go to the part focused more on the series, The Song of the Shattered Sands, and I think that the first time I read 12 Kings in Sharkai, the thing that stayed the most with me is how vivid the world is, and I was wondering how. I don't know, maybe there's a kind of a trick or a secret recipe, but I don't know. But how can you represent such a vivid world? I mean, when I went to Dice in the Bazaar, I could almost smell the spices or hear the noise, the overwhelming crowd, and
Yeah.
like the sand also on my skin, the
Yeah.
warming sun rays. I don't know. It was like I was there. I don't know. That was something that really marked my reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll touch on two things for this. So like one is just a very simple technique that a lot of writers are taught early on, and that is to invoke at least three of the five senses
Yeah.
early on
Mm-hmm.
in a scene. So whenever you're establishing a new scene, try to you know, mention heat or brushing up against skin. If they're tasting things, absolutely say how it tastes. Um, uh, but while you're doing it as well, this is getting a little bit deeper into writing technique, but always try to have words do double duty,
Mm-hmm.
triple duty, quadruple duty. And so if someone is having some tea, they might think, I normally like this tea, but I hate it today because it reminds me of what the person who made it did to me a week ago, you know, something like this.
Mm.
So that you're mixing in world and sensation with character and even history, and maybe even touch on, you know, magic along the way. And so I'm constantly trying to juggle all of these things. So simple rule of invoking multiple senses. And I always tell young writers, like, dialogue does not count as sound. Sounds are unique from voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say that, but then you can say things like he had a gravelly voice or a rough voice, or she chimed, you know, because she was speaking in a high voice or whatever. That counts. But you know, to try to mix these things in. And then the other thing that I will say is this is difficult to achieve, but I try. When we read, we fall into a hypnotic state.
Yeah.
We purposefully put ourselves into this place. We suspend disbelief and we get lost, you know, and pages and chapters can go, right, and we are no longer ourselves. We are in this world with these characters doing these things. And so as I'm writing, I try to enter that same place. It is hard because writing is slow, reading is fast, right? And while I'm writing, I feel like I'm pushing a stone up a hill, and it's just, you know, it's just very difficult, and it's very easy to kind of just leave it and go away and do other things, and you know, and the world invades around me, and I have other concerns about family or friends or the pandemic or whatever. So it's very hard to find that mental space. But that's what I strive for. I try to enter that same sort of hypnosis um, that I want the reader, you know, to feel. And if I can achieve that, you know, I feel like I'm doing a better job of that initial draft of writing. And when I get it, it's awesome. I love being in that place where the words are just flowing. I'm in the world. A lot of times it comes because I've done a bunch of like upfront work, meaning like I've set the scene. I've kind of put the characters in place, and I've shown what the general conflict at hand is, and so that's like getting the boulder up the hill, so to speak. And often when I fall into that place, it's when the boulder is starting to roll down the hill, because I've done a bunch of upfront work, and then I can, just really kind of be in that place and think about these characters and what they're thinking, and things just really come out easily. Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of writing, to be honest, is reaching that place.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine, because yeah, that's such a well, beautiful place. And I when I'm reading, I'm only, yeah, as you said, I'm putting myself in this kind of a bubble, and I just want to
Yeah.
stay in this bubble, to be honest. So,
Yeah. Go away, world.
yeah, that's it. Canceling plans you had with friends to stay in
Yeah.
Sharakai. Yeah, yeah, I get it. Another question that I had from one of my followers. Well, there's two questions. The first one is, who was the easiest and the most difficult characters to write?
Jada has been the easiest for sure.
Okay.
She has been the person that I sympathize with the most. And like, I put her in just a terrible situation, with her mother, her abandoning her, leaving her with a foster parent who was cruel, almost, seeding Cheta in a way with a desire to like bring the kings down as her mother wanted to. And so I just felt, I felt terrible for her, but also she is our hero. She is steadfast. She is angry in many ways. She's relentless. And it was just cool. Being in her shoes. The more difficult ones. Gosh. Some of the villains were also very fun to write. I'm not answering the second question yet. Like Isan became one of my favorite characters to write, and then Miriam too.
Oh.
Queen Miriam became, she was kind of like a secondary character at first, but she like just more and more, she became a part of my plans, and she gained a will of her own and started playing the game, so to speak, the Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
In her own way, and so that was really fun to write. I would say the more difficult characters to write are the ones that initially I don't know enough about. And so it I don't like this clumsy feeling of like writing a character, because they feel wooden to me initially, and it's really just an indicator that I haven't given them enough thought. I haven't found out what makes them unique, and what their personal hook is, that makes me want to write about them, and makes them interesting to the story and complicate the story. And so I'm going to forget his name. It was the Brahma.
Oh, Brahma. He's Brahma. My favorite.
Yeah, so he started out as this just a two-bit thief in one of the novellas with Cheta, and gets caught up. Oh my gosh, I really put that guy through the ringer.
Yeah.
He gets caught up with this like Jinn type character named Rumayesh, who is evil incarnate. She is a wicked creature and does not care about humans to any great degree, and just enjoys toying with them and stuff. And Brahma agrees to help Cheta to sort of get rid of this creature, and how she's sort of playing with Cheta and her friends and stuff. And he ends up getting trapped by her and becoming a plaything, of Rumayesh's. Anyway, yeah, so Brahma felt really two-dimensional to me initially. And so it was just a matter of kind of trying to, pushing I talked about connective tissue. I didn't know initially that that was going to happen to him, and so having Rumayesh sort of shift her attentions from Cheta to Brahma, and that spun off into all kinds of things in the following novels. He became a pretty major character for the sort of the middle and towards the end of the series and such, and that was really neat. And so yeah, the ones that are tough are the ones that I just don't know enough
Mm-hmm.
about yet, you know. And really, that is a good clue, for me anyway, that I haven't done my homework. You know,
Yeah.
that I do have to take a step back from the story for a second, and just think about them more, and fill in more of their details. Well, there's a common saying in writing that what you see, in the story is it's like an iceberg,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the reader sees the top 10%, you know, and what the writer has to create is the bottom 90% as well, so that it supports that 10% above the waterline. And you know, and so this is part of it, you know, like when you come across a character, if you haven't done your homework, they will not only feel cardboard, they will be cliche,
Mm-hmm.
because you're pulling from the easiest things that come to mind about them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Speaking about knowing your characters, there's another question of one of my followers, and it is, which character's personality is the most similar to yours?
You know, you know, probably Emery,
Yeah.
because he, you know, he in the beginning, and he's like a, I wasn't very much like this, but I would have the same level of discomfort if I did this. Emery comes across as like a bravo. You know, he's like, I mean, he's not just a jokester, but he comes across as like bigger than he is. He kind of struts around, and in a way, he had to do that because of where he grew up. The west end of Sharakai is a difficult place. It's poor. You know, crime is rampant, and it's just a tough place to grow up. And so, you know, that's, you know, what he was forced to do. But he's also, you know, like, uh, he's actually kind of shy, you know, in a way, and he does that as sort of a coping mechanism. And he likes to joke. He likes to joke around with Jada, especially, and other people too. Yeah, so probably Emmer.
Yeah, yeah. It's the one of my favorite characters is Brahma. Actually, I really
Yeah,
like them.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, I would like best friends like them, or maybe Dawood as well. That's the trio. I love them.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Devood was really fun to write, because the other ones, even though I showed I showed them as kids,
Yeah.
um, you didn't really see them growing up.
Mm.
But Davoud is different. He's actually quite young, even though in the collegiate. So he's in the University of Sharakai when we meet him, but he's still quite young, and he entered early. And he really grows up. He matures a lot as the story moves along. So it was really fun to see that arc, you know, of him turning into the man that he becomes later.
Yeah. You were speaking of the novellas, and I wanted to let me put the novellas here. Yeah, I wanted to cast a spotlight on the novellas because I think that they are a brilliant and clever and beautiful addition to the main story, and I cannot get enough of them. I recently read The Doors of Dusk and Dawn and In the Village Where Bright One Flows, and I love them because not only do they add a kind of layer to existing characters in the main story, but
Yeah,
they also kind of are just a fun pose in the main story, especially this one. It's kind of a murder mystery kind of.
yeah,
I
yeah.
love that, and this one was so like really somehow sad, but also very intense. I don't know if you've seen the movie Hidalgo with Viggo Mortensen. I think it's a
I know of the movie. I haven't
well,
seen it.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it made me think of this one because it's also a horse race in the desert,
Oh,
and so I
oh,
had all the intense moments in my head, like kind of you know, the movie. I'm transposing the movie on
yeah.
the book. That was so great. So I really love them. So I was
No,
wondering,
well,
uh, did you feel the need like to add these layers to these characters via novellas? Because I don't think that there's a lot of authors who does novellas on the side, and I think that's just yeah, that's a brilliant idea, and I want more of them.
yeah, yeah. I had known a few people that were doing that sort of thing. Brian McClellan comes to
Oh
mind
yeah,
with
yeah,
Powder Mage
yeah,
series, a few others, but the world itself was, I mean, it's big, you know, and there's there's so much history and stuff, and like some of the characters, I simply cannot spend time on in the course of the main story because they just don't add enough to it. But they interest me. I like them, and so Darkzada is a good example. You know, like he was cruel to Cheta when she was growing up, but that was partly because he loved um, Cheta's mother, Aya, and kind of not blames exactly Cheta for what happened, but she is sort of the focus of his anger over what happened to Aya as she's growing up and stuff. And so that was mean, you know, what he did to her, and cruel, and it's not very forgivable, but it is understandable, you know, what he did. And so, you know, like I just wanted to learn more about that guy, you know, and find out what, you know, what was his life like, you know, and then at the same time explore parts of Sharkai. I often tell people this, that one of the main inspirations for Sharkai was the Thieves World series of books. So it was a shared world anthology written in the 80s, in which there was a city called Sanctuary, which is at the south end, along the sea, of this vast empire that was being invaded. And there was the notion was that there's a pantheon of gods that are sort of tied to each group of people. So the empire that's receding has some gods, and the empire that's coming in also have gods of their own. And so not only do the powers of, you know, these two empires clash, the powers of the gods clash. That had a huge influence on me. And the shared world aspect of it is that a whole bunch of writers wrote different stories, and so it was like a mosaic novel in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, each person, each author writing a different part of Sanctuary and different characters, and then over time we see what's happening in this larger arc and stuff. And so I loved it. And so that influenced me to want to write, you know, these other stories and stuff, and just kind of fill in this larger, you know, set of characters and history and stuff, and create more of a quilt, more of a patchwork, a mosaic, you know, of Sharkai. So that's been fun to explore. And I'm actually writing right now. The thing I was writing before I hopped on is yet another, like the 9th novella, which will feature King Hassan at the very end of the series. So it shouldn't be, well, it won't be out for a while anyway, but people shouldn't read it until they've read book 6 because it has major spoilers. But it shows King Hassan with his daughter doing some intriguey stuff. It's fun.
Okay, I'm so excited because I know that King Hassan is like the favorite character of Remy, and he will be so happy.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a favorite of a lot of people, and I can see why. He's just, you know, he's witty, he's snarky, you know, he's not the most powerful of the kings, so he has to make by with, you know, other means and stuff. And yeah, he's fun.
Okay, great. So that was my last question, and I've just realized that I haven't pitched the story. Actually, we haven't told about what the story is actually about. If there is someone who doesn't know Sharakai yet, but I think on my channel I have spoken about it like 10,000 times. But could you maybe just do a small pitch of what the story is about? Because I always do it so people know what I will say.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the series is called The Song of the Shattered Sands, and it starts with 12 kings in Sharakai, and it focuses on Cheta, a young woman who we find out early on lost her mother to the 12 kings of Sharakai, who are apparently immortal. They have ruled the desert for 400 plus years with an iron fist. They are cruel. They guard their rule very closely. And Cheta doesn't know why her mother was killed, only that the kings did it and that they tortured her before she died. And she's not able to do anything about that until years later, when she discovers poems hidden in a book of poems her mother left her. So they're encrypted, they're hidden inside of that book. And so those lead her, they become riddles in essence. that lead her to discovering the Asurim, who are creatures who steal into the city and take tribute. They take people marked by the kings or people they choose themselves and take them outside the city and throw them to these twisted trees who strangle them and drink their blood, essentially. And they do that once every month. It's the Holy Night. And so Cheta is caught out on the Holy Night and meets one of the Asurim who leads her on a long and winding journey, and essentially gives her keys to bringing down the kings. And it's not easy because each of the kings has a unique set of powers, a unique set of weaknesses. And so that becomes her quest. But so it starts out as a tale of revenge, but it morphs over time. We discover that the Asurim are related to a lost tribe of people, and they are related to Cheta's mother's quest in the city and are the reason that she was killed. And so those things kind of revolve around each other. So this quest to bring down the kings becomes a quest to free the Asurim, and also bring the kings to justice, in essence, over time. And then the overarching arc is the grand question. The kings gained their power from the desert gods. The desert gods saved the kings and Sharkai from this big invasion that was about to happen from these tribes, these 12 tribes that circle the city. And so the question is, why did the gods do that? Why did the gods decide to give the kings power? And the answer to that question is actually the answer to the entire arc of the series. So we'll leave that in mystery, but it adds another layer that complicates Cheta's life eventually.
Yeah. So as you may know, if you've been following me on my channel for a few months, I'm loving this series. I'm currently reading the fourth book, and the sixth and final books is now out, so you can read it. Well, for now in French, we're only at the fourth book, I think. Yeah, fourth.
Yeah.
And yeah, I cannot recommend enough this series. And if you want to have other interviews of Bradley Peeble, I would put a few links down below, because I think that every interview adds a little bit more of what you have to say. So it's really interesting to watch them all. There's fellow booktubers who you have met. So that might be interesting. And Remy will also be doing an interview with you, and I can tell you that he's really excited because we are friends. So we were both fangirling and fanboying
All right.
together. So yeah, just a big thank you for being here, and I'm really looking forward to continue my reading tonight, even though I might cry. I don't know.
You'll have to let me know.
Yeah, we'll let you know. So thank you for everyone for watching. Thank you, Bradley Peeble, for being here, and we'll see you in another video.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me by. This was really fun.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.